took the job because it was the only one that didn't ask for references. The listing was buried on the third page of a county employment board, the kind of site that still uses clip art banners and hasn't updated its SSL certificate since 2019. Overnight custodial technician. Hargrove Civic Theatre, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. $14.50 per hour. No experience necessary. That last line should have told me everything. I was 27, 4 months behind on rent, and running out of ways to explain to my mother why I kept switching jobs. I'd been a dishwasher, a shelf stocker, a seasonal warehouse loader, and for 11 miserable days, a call center representative for an insurance company that I'm fairly certain no longer exists. I wasn't looking for a career. I was looking for a paycheck that cleared before my landlord's patients didn't. The interview, if you could call it that, took place in the theater's administrative office on a Tuesday afternoon. A woman named Dolores sat across from me behind a desk, so cluttered with binders and outdated playbills that I couldn't see the surface. She was in her 60s, thin-lipped, with reading glasses that she never actually looked through. She asked me 3 questions: whether I had a valid ID, whether I could work alone, and whether I had any issues with older buildings. I said no to all 3, though I wasn't sure what the last one meant. She handed me a single photocopied sheet, not a contract, just a list of nightly tasks, and told me I could start Thursday. The building locks at 10:30, she said. You'll have the place to yourself until morning. The alarm panel is by the loading dock. Don't touch it unless there's a fire. I asked if there was a training shift, someone to walk me through the layout. Dolores looked at me over the tops of her glasses for the first time. The layout is simple, she said. Main hall, lobby, restrooms, backstage, and the east corridor. That's it. I waited for her to continue. She didn't. The Hargrove Civic Theatre had been a fixture of the town since 1961. It sat at the end of Barker Street like something the neighborhood had grown around and then quietly forgotten. A wide, flat-fronted building with Art Deco molding that had gone from copper to green to something closer to black. The marquee still worked, technically, though half the bulbs were dead, and the remaining ones buzzed with a frequency you could feel in your teeth if you stood under them long enough. Inside, it was larger than it looked. The main auditorium seated around 400, with a sloped floor, heavy velvet curtains, the color of dried blood, and a proscenium stage that still had the original woodwork. The lobby was all tile and brass fixtures, most of them tarnished. There was a concession area that hadn't served anything in years, its popcorn machine unplugged and shoved into a corner like a piece of evidence someone had tried to hide. It smelled the way old buildings smell when they've stopped trying dust and industrial cleaner, and the faint chemical sweetness of aging upholstery. Every surface had a film on it. Not dirt exactly, more like time had left a residue. My first shift was uneventful in the way that uneventful can still feel wrong. I arrived at 11, let myself in through the loading dock with the key Dolores had given me, and spent the first hour just walking the building with a flashlight, trying to memorize the layout. The task sheet was straightforward. Vacuum the auditorium aisles, mop the lobby and restrooms, empty the trash, wipe down the seats in rows, A through F, the premium section apparently, though I couldn't tell the difference, and restock the soap dispensers. Basic stuff. The kind of work that empties your mind and fills your legs with ache. The only unusual item on the list was the last one. Do not enter the east corridor past the fire door. This section is closed for renovation. I didn't think much of it. Old buildings always have closed sections. Asbestos, water damage, structural concerns that no one has the budget to fix. I figured the East Corridor was just another wing that the city had sealed off and forgotten about, the way municipalities do when funding runs out and paperwork is easier than demolition. I finished my tasks by 3:30, sat in the lobby with a vending machine coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the Clinton administration, and watched the rain hit the front windows until my shift ended. That was Thursday. By the following Wednesday, I started noticing things. The first thing was the lights. I was mopping the hallway that connected the lobby to the backstage area, a long, windowless corridor with drop ceiling tiles and fluorescent panels that gave everything a pale, sickly cast when I saw it. A thin line of light, visible under the fire door at the far end of the hall, the East Corridor. I stopped mopping and stared at it. It wasn't bright, more like the kind of ambient glow you'd see from a room where someone had left a desk lamp on. Warm, steady, faintly orange, the way old incandescent bulbs look when they're running on low wattage. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, waiting for it to change. It didn't. It just sat there, a half-inch stripe of light between the bottom of the fire door and the floor, as calm and unremarkable as a nightlight. I walked up to the door and put my ear against it. Nothing. No sound at all. Not even the hum of the building's ventilation, which was audible everywhere else in the theater, a low, constant drone that I'd already learned to tune out the way you tune out your own breathing. But here, at the fire door, the hum stopped. It wasn't muffled. It wasn't distant. It was absent. Like the air on the other side of that door existed in a different acoustic space entirely. I tried the handle, locked. The kind of heavy institutional lock that takes a key I didn't have. I went back to mopping. The next morning, I mentioned it to Gerald. Gerald was the day shift maintenance supervisor, a large, slow-moving man in his 50s who wore the same olive green coveralls every day and communicated primarily through sighs. He was the closest thing I had to a coworker, since our shifts overlapped by about 15 minutes during the morning handoff. "There's a light on in the East Corridor," I said, "behind the fire door." Gerald was filling out a supply requisition form and didn't look up. "Probably a sensor light," he said. "Motion activated? The wiring in that section is old. There shouldn't be motion in a closed section." He paused. Not long. Maybe a full second. Then he continued writing. "Old wiring does strange things," he said. "I wouldn't worry about it." He said it the way people say things when they want you to stop asking. The second thing was the sound. It happened on my 9th or 10th shift. I'd stopped counting by then because the nights had started blending together the way they do when you work alone in a building that never changes. Same hallways, same fluorescent buzz, same vending machine coffee, same rain, or what felt like the same rain, hitting the same windows in the same arrhythmic pattern every night. I was in the auditorium, vacuuming between rows M and N, when I heard it. A voice. Not loud, not close. It came from somewhere behind the stage, behind the heavy curtain, behind the set pieces that were still arranged from the community theater's last production, a staging of Our Town that had closed 3 weeks before I started. Behind whatever was back there in the dark. It was a woman's voice, and she was reciting lines. I turned off the vacuum and stood absolutely still. The voice continued, measured, deliberate, The cadence of someone performing, not shouting, not whispering, but projecting to an audience that wasn't there. I couldn't make out the words. They were just below the threshold of comprehension, the way a conversation in the next room sounds when the walls are thick enough to strip away consonants and leave only rhythm. It lasted maybe 45 seconds. Then it stopped. I waited. The auditorium was silent except for the ventilation hum and the faint ticking of the radiators along the far wall. The stage was dark. The curtain hung motionless. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked up at it. The set for our town was still there. A few wooden chairs, a table, a painted backdrop of a New England town that looked like it had been done by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. Everything was exactly where it had been the night before. Nothing moved. Nothing was out of place. I climbed the side stairs and walked backstage. Empty. Props on their shelves. Costume rack against the wall. The ghost light, a single bare bulb on a tall stand. The kind theaters traditionally leave burning on an empty stage was on, casting a pale circle on the floor. No one was there. I stood in the wings for a long time, listening. The building creaked, the way old buildings do. The rain outside had picked up, and I could hear it drumming on the roof, high above the fly system. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe made a low, metallic groan. But no voice. I went back to vacuuming. The next morning, I almost mentioned it to Gerald. Almost. But something about the way he'd responded to my question about the lights, that careful, measured dismissal, made me decide against it. Instead, I asked him something else. How long has the East Corridor been closed? Gerald was putting on his jacket, getting ready to start his rounds. He had his back to me. Long time, he said, before I started. When did you start? 11 years ago. So it's been closed for over 11 years? He turned around. His expression wasn't hostile. It was something else. Something closer to fatigue. Like he'd had this conversation before, maybe many times, and he was tired of having it. The East Corridor is a building management issue, he said. It's not part of your job. It's not part of my job. It's closed, and it's going to stay closed. That's all either of us needs to know. He left. I sat in the lobby for a while after that, drinking my terrible coffee, watching the gray morning light creep across the tile floor. The marquee outside was dark. The street was empty. The building settled around me with the slow, groaning patience of something that had been settling for decades. I should have started asking real questions then. I should have pushed Gerald harder, or called Dolores, or looked up the building's history online, but I didn't. Because that's not how overnight work affects you. It doesn't make you curious, it makes you compliant. You learn to accept the parameters of your environment because questioning them requires an energy you no longer have. You clock in, you do the list, you clock out. Everything else is someone else's problem. That's what I told myself. The third thing was the charts. I need to explain something about the Hargrove Civic Theatre that I didn't learn until my third week. It wasn't always a theater. The building had been constructed in 1961 as a municipal annex, a multi-use civic facility that housed, at various points, a public health clinic, a city records office, a civil defense coordination center, and a community meeting hall. The theater portion, the auditorium, the stage, the lobby had been converted from the original assembly hall in 1978. When the city decided it needed a cultural venue more than it needed another meeting room. The East Corridor had been the clinic. I learned this not from Gerald, not from Dolores, but from a framed photograph in the hallway outside the restrooms. It was one of those black and white dedication photos you see in government buildings. A group of men in suits, cutting a ribbon, a crowd in the background, an American flag hanging from a pole that was slightly crooked. The caption read, Hargrove Municipal Health and Community Center, dedication March 14th, 1961. Behind the ribbon cutters, clearly visible through a set of double doors, was a hallway with examination rooms on either side. The East Corridor. Once I knew what the East Corridor used to be, the things I found started making a different kind of sense. It began with the clipboard. I was cleaning the backstage area one night, wiping down the prop tables, sweeping the floor. The usual when I found a clipboard wedged between two set pieces near the rear wall. It was old. The metal clip was rusted, and the board itself had the warped, water-stained look of something that had been in the building for a very long time. Clipped to it was a single sheet of paper, not a script page, not a production schedule, a patient intake form. It was mostly illegible. The ink had faded to the point where only fragments were readable. But I could make out a date in the upper right corner, November 8th, 1983. And below it, in a handwriting that was precise and small, a name I didn't recognize, followed by a series of codes and abbreviations that meant nothing to me. At the bottom of the form, in a different handwriting, looser, more hurried, someone had written a single word, remains. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put the clipboard back where I found it and finished sweeping. That should have been the end of it. Old building, old paperwork. The clinic had been closed for decades. Stray documents showing up in odd places wasn't unusual. I'd already found a 1970s fire inspection report behind a toilet in the men's room, and a stack of mimeographed civil defense pamphlets in a storage closet. Old buildings shed paperwork the way trees shed leaves. But the next night, the clipboard was gone. Not moved. Gone. I checked the space between the set pieces. I checked the prop tables. I checked the floor. The clipboard wasn't there. And when I looked at the spot where it had been a narrow gap between a painted flat and a wooden platform, I noticed that the dust on the floor had been disturbed. Not by me. By someone who had reached in from the other side. The side that faced the East Corridor wall. The fourth thing was the intercom. The Hargrove had an old PA system, the kind with wall-mounted speakers in every room, connected to a central console in the booth at the back of the auditorium. It hadn't been used in years, as far as I could tell. The console was unplugged, and most of the speakers had been painted over during one renovation or another, visible only as slight rectangular bulges beneath layers of institutional beige. But on my fourth week, around 2:15 in the morning, one of them turned on. I was in the lobby refilling a soap dispenser when I heard a soft click, followed by a hiss of static, the kind of sound a speaker makes when it's live, but no one is talking into it. It came from the hallway that led to the East Corridor. I walked toward it. The static was coming from a speaker mounted near the ceiling, just above the fire door. It was one of the old ones, circular, about 6 inches across, with a perforated metal grill that had gone brown with age. The static wasn't loud. It was more like breathing. A slow, rhythmic pulse of white noise that rose and fell at intervals that were just irregular enough to feel intentional. Then, beneath the static, I heard something else. A voice. The same voice. The woman. She was reciting again. The same measured theatrical cadence I'd heard from behind the stage. But this time I could make out individual words, and I say to you, sit down. Sit down and be still. You were told to wait. You were told to be patient. This is what patience looks like. This is what... The speaker clicked off. I stood in the hallway, my hand still holding the soap dispenser refill, and stared at the grill above the door. The static was gone. The building was quiet. The fluorescent tube above me flickered once, then held steady. I checked the PA console. It was still unplugged. The power cable was coiled on the floor beneath it, the plug resting against the baseboard like it hadn't been touched in years. I traced the wiring as far as I could through the booth, along the ceiling into a junction box that was screwed shut and labeled, "Do not service C building management." None of it should have been carrying a signal. I didn't tell Gerald. I didn't tell anyone. Because by that point, I'd started to understand something about the Hargrove that no one had explained to me and that I couldn't have articulated if they'd asked. The building was doing something at night, something it had been doing for a very long time. And the people who worked here, Gerald, Dolores, whoever else was connected to this place, already knew about it. They'd always known. And they had decided collectively and without discussion that the correct response was to not acknowledge it, not to deny it, not to explain it, just to continue as though it wasn't happening. And I was being expected to do the same. I started paying closer attention after that, not investigating. That's too active a word for what I was doing. I was just noticing, letting my eyes rest on things I would have normally looked past. The stage, for instance. Every night when I arrived, the Our Town set was arranged the same way. Chairs, table, backdrop. But I started to realize that the same way wasn't quite accurate. The chairs moved. Not dramatically, not across the stage. But their angles shifted. One night, a chair would be facing stage left at roughly 45 degrees. The next night, the same chair would be squared to the audience. The night after that, it would be pulled slightly back from the table as though someone had just stood up from it. I started taking photos on my phone. Nothing obsessive, just a quick snapshot of the stage when I arrived, and another when I left. When I compared them the next morning, the differences were undeniable. The chairs were being moved. The table, too, though less noticeably an inch or two in one direction, a slight rotation. And the backdrop, which I'd assumed was fixed to the fly system, had subtle variations in its height, as though someone had been adjusting the batten. Someone was using the stage at night, but that was impossible. I was the only person in the building from 11 to 7. The doors were locked. The alarm was set. I would have heard footsteps, seen lights, noticed the sound of furniture scraping across a wooden floor. Unless it was happening during the brief windows when I was in other parts of the building. The restrooms, the lobby, the backstage storage areas that required me to turn corners and close doors behind me. I tested this theory by changing my routine. Instead of starting with the auditorium and working outward, I started from the lobby and worked inward, timing my arrival at the auditorium for different points in the night. 1:30, 2:15, 3:45. Every time the stage was still, the set was arranged. Nothing moved while I watched. But every morning when I compared my arrival photo to the one from the night before, the chairs had shifted again. There was a woman named Pauline who worked the box office on matinee days. I'd see her sometimes during the morning handoff, a small gray-haired woman in her 70s who moved through the lobby with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing the same thing in the same place for longer than most people stay in a single career. She was polite to me in the way that people are polite to workers. They consider temporary friendly enough to nod, not enough to learn my name. One morning I asked her about the East Corridor. She was sorting tickets behind the box office window, and her hands stopped moving. What about it? I heard it used to be a clinic. It was, a long time ago. What kind of clinic? Pauline resumed sorting. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, as though she was paying very careful attention to each ticket. It was a public health clinic, she said. Vaccinations, screenings, that sort of thing. Why did it close? The city built a new health center on Granger Road. This one wasn't needed anymore. When was that? She paused again. Not the way Gerald paused with fatigue or irritation. Pauline paused the way someone pauses when they're choosing between two versions of the truth. 1984, she said, or 85. I don't remember exactly. And the patient form I found was dated 1983. Pauline looked at me. Her expression was perfectly neutral. Not alarmed, not confused, not curious. Neutral. The kind of neutral that takes effort. I don't know anything about that, she said. Old paperwork turns up. It's an old building. She went back to her tickets. I stood there for a moment, watching her. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She was the picture of calm. But there was something in the quality of her calm that bothered me. Something practiced about it, like a person who has trained themselves not to react to a specific stimulus. Pauline, I said, who uses the stage at night? She didn't look up. She didn't stop sorting. She didn't react at all. Nobody uses the stage at night, she said. The theater is closed. The chairs move. Chairs don't move by themselves. I know. That's why I'm asking who moves them. Pauline put down her stack of tickets, folded her hands on the counter, and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as pity. You're working overnights, she said. Overnights make people see things that aren't there. It's the isolation, the silence. The brain starts filling in blanks that don't need filling. I've seen it happen before more than once. She picked up her tickets and resumed sorting. My advice, she said, is to do your job, go home, and get some sleep. Don't make this place more than it is. I left. But as I walked through the lobby toward the loading dock, I glanced back. Pauline was watching me through the box office window. She looked away the moment I turned, but I saw a flicker of something behind the neutral mask. Not anger, not fear, guilt. I couldn't sleep that day, not because I was scared I wasn't, not yet, but because my mind kept circling the same set of observations, trying to arrange them into a pattern that made sense. The lights in the East Corridor, the voice on the intercom, the chairs on the stage, the patient intake form, Gerald's deflections, Pauline's careful neutrality. None of it added up to anything concrete. It was all ambiguous, all deniable, all explainable if you were willing to accept explanations that required you not to think about them too hard. Old wiring, acoustic anomalies, settling foundations, stray paperwork, the cognitive distortions of a tired man working alone in a building that was older than he was. I could have accepted all of that. Part of me wanted to. But there was one thing I couldn't explain away. And it was the thing that kept me staring at the ceiling of my apartment while the afternoon light moved across the wall. The voice I'd heard on the stage and through the intercom was reciting the same lines both times. Not similar lines. The same ones. The same words in the same order, with the same intonation and the same pauses, as though she were rehearsing a single speech, perfecting it through repetition, running through it again and again and again, in the empty dark of a building that was supposed to be unoccupied. And the speech wasn't from our town. I'd read the script. I'd found a copy in the Backstage office, dog-eared and coffee-stained, with blocking notes penciled in the margins. I'd gone through it page by page, looking for the lines I'd heard. They weren't there. Whatever she was rehearsing, it wasn't part of any production the Hargrove had staged. The next shift changed things. I arrived at 11, same as always. Let myself in through the loading dock. Walked the building. Started my tasks. Everything was normal for the first 2 hours. Then, at 1:17 in the morning, I know the exact time because I looked at my phone the moment it started. The stage lights came on. Not the house lights, not the fluorescents, the stage lights, the full rig, Fresnels and ellipsoidals and PAR cans, all of them firing at once, flooding the stage with the warm amber gold wash of a performance lighting cue. The kind of light that's designed to make human faces look alive. I was in the auditorium when it happened. 6th row, center aisle, pushing the vacuum. The lights came on with a heavy mechanical thunk, the sound of a dozen breakers engaging simultaneously, and suddenly the stage was lit the way it would be for a show. Bright, warm, waiting. I turned off the vacuum. The stage was empty. The Our Town set was there. Chairs, table, backdrop, but the arrangement was different from how it had been when I arrived. The chairs were positioned in a semicircle now, facing downstage. The table had been moved to the wings, and the backdrop had been raised, revealing the bare brick wall at the rear of the stage. Someone had restaged the set. While I was in the building, I stood in the aisle and stared at the empty, brightly lit stage for what felt like a very long time. The lights hummed. The ventilation system was silent, that same absence of sound I'd noticed near the East Corridor fire door. The air in the auditorium felt different. Heavier, warmer, like the building was holding its breath. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from backstage. Slow, measured, deliberate. The sound of hard-soled shoes on a wooden floor, moving from stage left toward center stage. One person, walking with the unhurried confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had walked this path 1,000 times before. A figure stepped into the light. It was a woman. She was wearing a dark dress, simple, unornamented, the kind of thing you'd see in a mid-century drama. Her hair was pulled back. Her posture was rigid. She stood at center stage facing the empty auditorium, and she began to speak. "You were told to wait," she said. "You were told to be patient. This is what patience looks like. This is what waiting looks like. You sit and you do not move, and you do not speak, and when they come for you, you stand, and you follow, and you do not ask where you are going." Her voice was clear and controlled, projected, theatrical. She spoke the way trained actors speak from the diaphragm, with resonance, each word placed precisely in the air like a stone being set into mortar. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the seats, all of them, as though they were full. "There are rooms in this building that have never been empty," she continued. "Not once, not in all the years since the doors first opened. You think a room is empty because you don't see anyone in it. but a room remembers everyone who has ever sat in it. Every examination, every diagnosis, every conversation held in confidence that was never truly confidential. The walls absorb it, the floors hold it, and at night, when the building is quiet, it all comes back, every word, every name, every chart that was filed and forgotten. She paused. The pause was theatrical, timed, practiced, calculated for effect. "You were told to wait," she said again. "So wait." The lights went out, not gradually, not with a fade. They cut all at once, with the same heavy mechanical thunk. The auditorium plunged into darkness so complete that I couldn't see my own hands. I stood there in the dark, my heart hammering, my breath loud in the silence. Then the house lights came back on the regular fluorescence, pale and buzzing, and the stage was empty. The Our Town set was back in its original configuration. Chairs at the table, backdrop lowered, ghost light burning, as though nothing had happened. I walked to the stage. I climbed the stairs. I checked every corner of the backstage area. I opened every door, looked behind every flat, searched every dressing room. No one. Nothing. No evidence that anyone had been there at all, except for one thing. On the stage floor, at the exact spot where the woman had been standing, there was a scuff mark. Fresh. The kind of mark a hard-soled shoe makes on a wooden surface. I knelt down and touched it. It was warm. I called Dolores the next day. She answered on the 6th ring, and her voice had the flat, pre-caffeinated quality of someone who hadn't expected the phone to ring. "There was someone in the building last night," I said. Silence. "On the stage," I continued. "A woman. She was performing something. A monologue. The stage lights came on by themselves, the full rig. She was there for maybe 2 minutes, and then the lights cut, and she was gone." More silence. "Dolores?" "I heard you," she said. "Who was she?" "I don't know what you saw." "I just told you what I saw." "You told me what you think you saw. Those are different things." I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger exactly. Something closer to the frustration you feel when you're telling the truth and the person listening has already decided not to believe you. Not because they think you're lying, but because believing you would require them to acknowledge something they've spent a long time pretending doesn't exist. "Dolores," I said, "the stage lights are controlled from the booth. The booth was locked. The console was off. There is no way those lights came on by themselves." "Old wiring," she said. "I'll have Gerald look at it." "This isn't about wiring." "I'll have Gerald look at it," she repeated. "Is there anything else?" I wanted to say more. I wanted to tell her about the patient form, the intercom, the chairs. I wanted to ask her what happened in the East Corridor in 1983 or 1984, or whenever the clinic actually closed, not the version she told people, but the real version, the one that Pauline knew, the one that Gerald had spent 11 years carefully not discussing. But I could hear it in her voice, that same practiced calm, that same institutional neutrality. She wasn't going to tell me anything, not because she didn't know, because she decided a long time ago that not telling was the same as it not being true. "No," I said, "it, nothing else." She hung up. I went back that night. I don't know why. The rational thing would have been to quit, to leave the key on Dolores's desk, walk away, and find another terrible job in another terrible building where the worst thing that happened after midnight was a clogged drain. But I didn't quit, And the reason I didn't quit was the same reason I hadn't quit the parking garage where rats outnumbered tenants, or the warehouse where the loading dock lights never fully worked, or the call center where my supervisor cried in the break room every Thursday. I didn't quit because I couldn't afford to. Because quitting meant admitting that I was the kind of person who couldn't hold a job, and I'd already admitted that too many times. So I went back and I changed my routine. Instead of starting with the lobby and working inward, I went straight to the auditorium. I sat in the 6th row, the same seat I'd been standing near the night before, and I waited. Midnight passed, 12:30. 1. At 1:12, the stage lights came on. Same thunk, same warm amber wash, same sudden silence as the ventilation cut. She was there, standing at center stage. Same dress, same posture, same position. She began to speak. You were told to wait. You were told to be patient. This is what patience looks like. The same speech. Word for word. Inflection for inflection. Pause for pause. Identical to the night before in every detail, as though she were performing a recording of herself. I didn't move. I didn't breathe louder than I had to. I just watched. She continued through the monologue, the rooms that had never been empty, the walls that absorbed, the charts that were filed and forgotten. She hit every mark, every beat, every timed silence. And when she reached the end, you were told to wait, so wait. The lights cut, the darkness fell, and the house lights came back on to an empty stage. But this time I didn't go up to check. I stayed in my seat because I'd noticed something I hadn't noticed the night before. When she spoke about the rooms that had never been empty, the examinations, the diagnoses, she wasn't looking at the seats. She was looking at the east corridor wall. The next day I went to the county records office. It took me 2 hours and a surprising amount of patience from a clerk named Dennis. But I found what I was looking for. The building permits and inspection records for the Hargrove Municipal Health and Community Center, 1961 to present. The clinic had opened in 1961 and operated continuously until 1984. According to the records, it was a standard public health facility, immunizations, screenings, prenatal care, tuberculosis testing. Nothing unusual. The closure was attributed to facility consolidation when the new health center opened on Granger Road. But the inspection records told a different story. In 1979, the clinic had been expanded. The East Corridor, originally 4 examination rooms and a reception area, was extended to include 6 additional rooms, a storage facility, and a secondary entrance accessible only from inside the building. The expansion was funded by a state grant, and the stated purpose was extended patient services. In 1982, the expanded wing was reclassified. The new designation was residential observation, and the occupancy permit was amended to allow overnight stays. In 1983, a fire inspection report noted that the East Corridor contained 17 beds, 4 of which showed signs of sustained occupancy, and recommended improved ventilation and fire egress. In 1984, the clinic closed. The closure order was signed by the county health director, the building manager, and a third individual whose name I didn't recognize, Dr. Eleanor Voss. I searched for Eleanor Voss in the county records. I found one result, a professional license filing from 1976, listing her specialty as psychiatric medicine, and an address that corresponded to the Hargrove building. There was no record of her license being renewed, revoked, or transferred. There was no obituary. There was no forwarding address. After 1984, Eleanor Voss simply stopped appearing in official documents, as though she had been quietly removed from the record the way you remove a page from a binder carefully, completely, leaving no torn edges. That night I brought a flashlight and a pry bar. I'm not proud of this. It wasn't brave, and it wasn't smart. It was the decision of a person who hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks, and who had spent the previous 48 hours becoming increasingly certain that every person connected to the Hargrove Civic Theatre was participating in a conspiracy of silence that stretched back 4 decades. The fire door at the end of the hallway was heavy steel framed, with a push bar on my side and a deadbolt above it. The deadbolt was old, and the frame around it was older. It took me less than 5 minutes with the pry bar to force enough gap to slip the bolt. The door swung inward. The east corridor was dark. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through air that smelled different from the rest of the building, not musty exactly, but stale, in a way that suggested the ventilation hadn't reached this section in a very long time, or had been deliberately sealed off. The hallway was long and straight. Institutional tile floor, drop ceiling, fluorescent fixtures overhead, all of them dark. Doors on both sides wooden, with small wire glass windows set at eye level. The doors were numbered, not with room numbers, with dates. November 3rd, 83, November 8th, 83, November 15th, 83, November 22nd, 83. I shone my flashlight through the window of the first door. Inside was a small room. A bed metal framed, institutional, with a thin mattress and folded linens. A chair, a side table with a lamp, a clipboard hanging from a hook on the wall. The bed was made, not old made. Not the way a bed looks when it was made once and left for 40 years. Made the way a bed looks when someone makes it every day as a matter of routine. The sheets were smooth. The pillow was fluffed. The corners were tucked with the tight, angular precision of someone who had been trained or had trained themselves to do it exactly the same way every time. I tried the door, unlocked. The room was cold. Not building cold colder, the way a room gets when it has its own temperature, independent of the system around it. The clipboard on the wall held a single sheet of paper, and on it, in the same small, precise handwriting I'd seen on the intake form, was a daily log. Dates, vital signs, medication codes, behavioral notes. The most recent entry was from 2 days ago. I read it 3 times. I read it slowly, carefully, the way you read something when you need to be absolutely certain that you're not imagining it. The handwriting was real. The ink was fresh. The date was accurate. Someone was maintaining these charts. Someone was coming into this sealed, locked, officially closed corridor and updating patient records for rooms that had been empty, that were supposed to have been empty for over 40 years. I checked every room. There were 12 of them. Each one was identical: bed, chair, side table, lamp, clipboard. Each bed was made. Each clipboard held a current chart. Each chart showed daily entries in the same handwriting, documenting vital signs and medications and behavioral observations for patients whose names I didn't recognize and who, according to every official record I'd been able to find, did not exist. At the end of the corridor, there was a 13th door. It was different from the others, wider, with no window, and a nameplate mounted at eye level. Dr. E. Voss, Director of Residential Observation. I tried the handle, it opened. The office was small, a desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf lined with psychiatric texts from the 1970s and 1980s. A coat rack with a single garment hanging from it, a dark dress, simple, unornamented. The same dress. On the desk, arranged with careful symmetry, was a script, not a medical chart, not an intake form. A theatrical script, hand-typed on onion skin paper, with stage directions penciled in the margins. The title page read, "The Waiting Room, a Play in One Act," by Eleanor Voss. I sat down at the desk and read it. It was short, maybe 15 pages. A monologue performed by a single character identified only as the Doctor, set in an unnamed institutional facility. The character addressed an unseen audience of patients, explaining to them the nature of their confinement, the reasons for their observation, and the importance of patience, of waiting, of sitting still and not asking questions. The lines were the ones I'd heard, every word. The speech about the rooms that had never been empty, the walls that absorbed, the charts that were filed and forgotten. It was all there, typed out neatly with blocking notes that specified stage position, lighting cues, and the exact duration of each pause. At the bottom of the last page, beneath the final line, "You were told to wait, so wait." There was a handwritten note in the same precise script. Performance schedule, nightly, no exceptions, no audience required. I put the script down. I sat in Eleanor Voss's chair, in Eleanor Voss's office, in the sealed corridor of a building that had been pretending for 40 years that this corridor didn't exist. And I tried to understand what I was looking at. A psychiatrist who had run a residential observation ward in a civic building, who had written a play about her patients, who had at some point begun performing that play on the theater's stage. Every night, after the actors went home, after the audiences left, after the building locked its doors and the lights went out, and the only person awake in the entire structure was whichever underpaid custodian had been hired to push a vacuum and not ask questions. And then the clinic had closed, and Eleanor Voss had disappeared, and the corridor had been sealed, and the beds had continued to be made, and the charts had continued to be filled, and the performance had continued, night after night after night, for decades. The same monologue, the same blocking, the same lighting cue in front of seats that were empty, and a corridor that was full of patients who had stopped existing the moment the paperwork said they did. I didn't understand it. I still don't. Not fully, not in any way that I can lay out in a sequence of causes and effects that leads to a conclusion I'm comfortable defending. But I understood one thing. Sitting in that chair, holding that script, listening to the silence of a corridor that should have been empty and wasn't. The building wasn't haunted. That's not the right word. The building was performing, it was running a show. The same show every night. Because something had decided that the show must go on. That the patients must be monitored. That the charts must be updated. That the doctor must deliver her monologue to an audience that would never applaud, in a theater that would never acknowledge the performance was happening. And everyone who worked here knew. Gerald knew. Pauline knew. Dolores knew. They'd all known for years, and they'd all made the same choice, to let it continue, to leave the fire door locked and the corridor sealed and the lights on their automatic cue, to accept the performance as part of the building's nightly routine, the way they accepted the leaking pipes and the broken marquee bulbs and the vending machine that charged $2 for coffee that tasted like pencil shavings. Because what else could they do? What do you do when a building decides it isn't finished with something? When an institution outlives the people who created it and continues running itself, filing charts, making beds, rehearsing scripts long after everyone responsible has left or died or simply stopped coming in. You don't fight it, you don't investigate it, you certainly don't talk about it. You do your job, you go home, you get some sleep. You were told to wait. So you wait. I left the east corridor at 4:30 in the morning. I closed the fire door behind me. I pushed the deadbolt back into its housing, and though the frame was damaged enough that it wouldn't hold for long, I finished my shift. I mopped the lobby. I emptied the trash. I wiped down the seats in rows A through F. I didn't take photos of the stage. When Gerald arrived at 7, I handed him my key. "I'm done," I said. He looked at me, not with surprise, not with concern, with the same expression Pauline had given me, that quiet, practiced, almost tender pity. "Yeah," he said. "They usually are." He took the key and put it in his pocket. I walked out through the loading dock and into a morning that was gray and wet and smelled like asphalt. The marquee was dark. The street was empty. A pigeon sat on the ledge above the entrance, watching me with the blank and curious gaze of something that had been watching people leave this building for a very long time. I drove home. I slept for 14 hours. When I woke up, it was dark. And for one disoriented, sickening moment, I didn't know if I was in my apartment or in one of the rooms in the east corridor. The bed was made the same way. Tight corners, flat pillow, the sheets pulled smooth. I got up and turned on every light. I never went back to the Hargrove. I found another job night stocking at a grocery store in the next town over, where the worst thing that happened after midnight was a broken jar of marinara in aisle 7. I didn't look up the building's history again. I didn't search for Eleanor Voss. I didn't call Dolores or Gerald or Pauline. But sometimes late at night, when the store is quiet and I'm alone between the shelves, I hear something. Not a voice, not words, just a rhythm, a cadence. The ghost of a speech being delivered to an empty house over and over and over, in a building at the end of Barker Street where the lights come on at 1:12, and the chairs rearrange themselves, and the east corridor smells like disinfectant and old paper, and something else, something I couldn't name then and can't name now, except to say that it smelled like a room that had been occupied for so long that the room itself had forgotten what emptiness felt like. They posted the job listing again last week. I saw it on the same county employment board, buried on the 3rd page, between a landscaping gig and a weekend dog walking position. Overnight custodial technician, Hargrove Civic Theatre, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., $14.50 per hour. No experience necessary. Someone will take it, someone always does. And the rehearsal will continue. The chairs are already in position.